Well, because now you're doing it all, so why keep on flogging the dead horse? No need. Maybe Tata is getting closer. You can tell me, I don't know. 0.913, bloody hell. Excuse my French. What I would do this time is actually get you to start working on these 15 points with a company of your choice. But you would need to have documents or your internet facilities and so on. And quite often we set all this up in this 2-day workshop. We thought we wouldn't get round to that. So this is kind of the learning outcomes that we as professors say. You've understood what is strategy, and you've considered how to put a CSR strategy in place. And over lunch, you're going to say, Michael, you didn't discuss this. So I'm available. Presentation I tried to finish yesterday. It's got some pictures of George Bush and things like that. So get your juices going. I don't know how long it's going to take me. Probably 15 minutes. And then we can go back to some of the issues here that we can discuss. I also have a couple of case studies, but I know political economy of CSR. We're waiting for Harsha on that. 15 points we've been through. Practical application we've not done. We've discussed this whole thing about non-profits. And the other thing that I've been playing around with is a national social responsibility index. And because my friendly country in Somalia doesn't do too well. The usual suspects come quite high. You might be interested to know, how do I get to that? Essentially what I do is I use the same methodology of the Human Development Index. It ranks countries from 1 to 180 on the basis of their human development. What the Human Development Index does is adds on life expectancy plus a number of years of education plus real income per capita and divides by 3. Well, it scales it from 0 to 1. Years ago, when I was working on such an index, I was asked by UNICEF to come up with an index very similar to that. And I made the mistake of getting my friends involved who are specialists in social indicators. And they said, Michael, it's far too complicated to talk about levels of living and human development and so on one dimension. It's a multi-dimensional thing, typical academics. So I dropped the candle on that one, and then this young man who nobody had ever heard of called A.K. Sen came along and convinced the UN to be, what you're doing is, you just add up life expectancy, literacy and income and divide by 3. And the main reason they came up with that is because those indicators are easily available. And their idea was to show that you could rank countries differently on the basis of human development. But if you look at that index, literacy and life expectancy, well, most countries only calculate those every 5 years. And the Human Development Index is presented every year. And the only thing that changes is income. So here they're trying to get away from income when they actually use income. So our friends at the UN. Anyway, so I think, well, they can get away with it, so can I. What I do here is to add by 3 indices. One, Transparency International, and 3, life expectancy, because I think the country that, to me, life expectancy is the ultimate indicator of development. In fact, you don't need to go into all the big worries about development. And my mentor, Professor Dudley Sears at IDS, was the one who came up with this. This is not my idea. And it's amazing it's not really taken off, because life expectancy at birth is the ultimate indicator of development. If you have a lousy country, you're going to have a very low life expectancy. You could argue that you have a long life expectancy in prison, but I don't think the evidence is very good on that. So you need some interaction with people, and you need participation. So a lot of what we used to call non-material needs. Well, here the democracy index, which I actually just take straight from The Economist.
Okay, so
Yeah, no, I knew you would. And I took that from the Economist Intelligence Unit. That one is kind of reasonably well respected. The other two are Transparency International's corruption index, and the third one is life expectancy at birth. And then I scale them and divide by 3 and get my overall index. And it's been quite interesting. In fact, the usual culprits come to the top as always. I mean, the Scandinavian countries always do pretty well. Whatever you do, however you shape the candle. The interest is called lower down the sky. I have to look up. You're going to ask me where India is. I have to look at that. So anyway, the point of this was that you can actually think of that responsibility, because if a country is not democratic, it's got a low life expectancy, and corruption is very high, but it's a pretty irresponsible country. And that's why Somalia comes low. This you've seen, the terms, I like this as a very statistical saying, that the terms used to attempt corporations to become more attuned to their stakeholders knows no upper bound. And the phrases come out continually. It's something most of them you've seen. The question, why CSR? Why do we need CSR? This is pretty important about unemployment trends over time, how they've been increasing.
In India, we have multinational companies having plants, like their industries from Germany, Netherlands, USA, UK, all that, and they're working in India. So they are having governed by an embassy. They have got the consul who is having the consuls who are governing the governance of these people working there.
That's a very, very good question, and it's handled at quite length in the GRI initiative. They call it boundary conditions, and it's been quite a subject of discussion for exactly the reasons that you mentioned. When I did my first ranking of companies, I ranked UK and Swiss companies from 1 to 100 because I couldn't get the data for the top Forbes 500. Now that data is better available. In '94, when I did that, it wasn't available. My boundary condition was only UK based, but it could include overseas possessions, overseas companies, because quite often companies who registered at that time presented their accounts for all their subsidiaries as well, which is part of the law. But that's changed over time. As you know, the companies are based in the Bahamas and the Dutch Antilles and the rest of it. And that's changing again as with new laws coming in. It's actually getting really kind of complex to know where a company is and where it belongs. So BP, for example, British Petroleum, is actually an American company. It's a good question, but not easy to answer. A good question. When we did rankings, one I've been involved in is Arabia CSR, based out of Dubai. And we had exactly that issue. Is the company that won, I've forgotten the name of it actually, something like, it wasn't Nestle, but something similar. And we found that the multinational companies like Nestle had very good reputations, not only internationally, but also domestically. But what we did, we had a number of questionnaires. In fact, a bit like the critics questionnaire, believe it or not, a bit longer. And we asked that only of companies operating actually within the UAE. But so that those Arabia CSR awards was only what they were doing in the country. But one problem was quite often, if you asked, have you got a social report, might be one of the questions, was it distributed? That social report would only be international. Some companies, I remember British American Tobacco had a national report for every country in which they operated, and they had guidelines coming from the HQ. So it did vary quite a lot, and it does vary quite a lot, and then it depends the type of company. because, for example, Coca-Cola, it franchises, it basically gets royalties from the essence that it sells to its franchises, and it leaves them to get on with it. But they do put the rule of thumb over it, because the same logo and the same conditions of production and so on, but not necessarily the same social responsibilities. So it's never easy, and as I found out in the Arabia CSR Awards, we did try and make it national. So when you're trying to do it internationally, generally they would, like the Forbes 500, they would include the whole world. But for Americans, the whole world's America. And I'm serious about that. So
I totally agree.
It's a good question. And the thing is that you really have to go into details on that. And everyone's can be a bit different. And we're talking about these companies as if they're kind of unity. I mean, a company like Walmart has got 300,000 employees. The UN is about 15,000. But if you include peacekeeping forces, it's still even they're not bigger than Walmart. Incredible how big these companies are. There are hundreds of them. The interesting thing about all these big companies is how much employment, and I got onto employment again, is that these companies don't actually generate much direct employment. Indirect might be quite big. And there's only one ever estimate I've seen of that, which was done in the early 90s by UNCTAD, because I use it quite a lot. Anyone? UNCTAD, United Nations Conference on Trade and Development. It used to be very well known. It's much less well known today. I think in India at one point was. I think you were saying that with last night. In India was ahead of it. Korea was, Gamini Korea from Sri Lanka. See how confusing it is. Gamini Sri Lanka from Korea. Gamini Korea from Sri Lanka was ahead of it in the 70s. They're now working a lot on CSR actually, but they're doing it in a very strange way as UN chemistry, because they all want to be different from each other. So they've got to have a different definition. So the UNCTAD will focus on trade and development. UNIDO would have their own CSR index based on industrialization and so on. So, let the flowers bloom. But companies in general, big ones, I think when I looked at the calculation, the total direct and indirect employment of the big companies is less than 3% of world employment. So, saying to a company, you should come invest here and create lots of employment, they don't generally. And the other thing is that the oil companies, which are the most transnational of all, have done more on CSR than anything else, highly capital intensive. And because they create quite a lot of GDP, the populace at large is always saying these people should employ more. And it's a big conundrum for the international oil companies, because they can't. So what they do is to employ lots of ancillary workers as part of the company, but they don't do particularly very much. In the last few years of unemployment, you can see that each bar represents in aggregate total unemployment, and it's just been increasing. And it's absolutely totally unnecessary. Would you like to know why? Well, I'd have to put a Keynesian equation. Are you up to that much?
Are you trying to say that CSR activities being taken up by public sector or companies is actually reducing jobs?
No, I'm not. I haven't said anything about that yet. That's a good question. I've said that.
But the graph suggests so.
No, the reason why CSR is the increase in employment. Now let me give you. Now you ask. Economic growth, output. As output grows, that's economic growth, is equal to consumption plus exports, they always use M, I don't know why, minus imports, okay? Every politician should know this equation. Maybe America would have been saved, and a recession would have been saved if they understood this. Let me just split up consumption into private consumption, public consumption is recurrent government expenditure.
Sorry, can you go back to that formula one more time? Sorry about that.
Yeah, sure. Output is equal to consumption plus investment plus exports minus imports. Okay? You can't grow an economy without any of those. This is a standard Maynard-Keynes equation from which came the World Bank, the IMF, and so on. Well, you wrote 3 books and stuff like that. This is the essence. Now, consumption is composed of private and public consumption. Public consumption, what economists call government expenditure, recurrent expenditure. So as you know, all expenditure is both recurrent, salaries mainly, and investment, spending on bridges and roads and so on. Let me talk about America, because this is the biggest disaster out. My own country also followed suit. So what happened in America after Obama got elected? Public consumption went down. Okay? Because the Republicans wouldn't allow any expenditure. They even reduced military expenditure. And military is actually often used by governments to increase employment. Some people call this war. Second World War came after a recession. So we'll be very careful. So governments tend to use war to mop up employment. But in America what they did was that they had a freeze. In fact, they even reduced military expenditure. And the Republicans even agreed to that. So here we go. We have public expenditure going down. What about investment? We had public investment going down. Building, well, you could call building warships investment. What a waste of money. But they didn't even repair their bridges and their roads. They're all deteriorating, like there's no tomorrow. Airports and so on. So that went down too. So now what have we got left? We want to increase output and growth. Oh, employment is a function of output, obviously. So the economy grows, it employs more people. And this is capital-intensive growth or technology-intensive. We don't get into that. Basically, as the economy grows, it increases employment. So, public consumption has gone down, public investment's gone down.